Good evening, everyone. Thank you for joining us tonight for this conversation about youth and social media presented with our partner, Tata Consulting Services. I myself was excited to be moderating a discussion about youth and social media because, it has really changed my life and my industry in particular. I mean, when I think back on, when people ask me, of my 25 years in journalism, what have been the biggest changes? And I say immediately, the internet, the smartphone, Twitter. And I remember really clearly one of those early moments where I knew it was going to change my business. And it was January 2009, and I was an editor for the Associated Press in New York, and their headquarters is like 2 blocks off the Hudson River. And I'm sitting there one afternoon, and the next thing I know, there's a plane landing in the river, floating on there, and the people are evacuating off the wing. But what was important about that moment, besides the fact nobody died, was that the first photo taken of that event, that the Associated Press, which is known for its photos, the first photo of that event came from Twitter. It came from a bystander who just happened to be there, and the Associated Press had to actually track that person down and buy the rights to that photo. That was a real changing moment for us. I mean, Twitter with 140 characters has disrupted the entire journalistic business model. I mean, everybody in this room can break news, can inform the public, can cultivate and communicate globally and instantly. It has changed the role of the journalism. I mean, back, in the day, and that was only 10 years ago, maybe? Journalists relied on wire services like AFP, the Associated Press, Reuters, to get instant breaking news. Twitter has become a news service of sorts. I mean, we follow, I think, almost every speaker on these panels. I mean, we look for news in different ways now, and you do too. And it's also changed our business model in the way people consume news, social media. Because, we all know that newspapers are dead, and Politico is part of the new model, but newspapers are dead, but when you think about where news subscribers are coming from, where new readers are coming from, the highest source of growth is what we call horizontal. It's people who have come across an article because they found it on social media. So I just want hands up. Who actually clicked on an article from Twitter or Facebook this week? Hands up. This is it. That's it. I mean, it's almost unanimous. This is a changing business model, it's been exciting. It's been frustrating. It's been frightening from time to time because also, although it's made you citizen journalists and change things, it's also, I found, raised the bar for the workforce, for people coming into it. I know that when I graduated from university, I had nothing really, but nobody would hire me now with the skill I had when I got out of university. Nobody, as a journalist. I mean, what editors look for now are just this jack-of-all-trade person who can take video, edit video, post video to the web, interview someone at the same time, tweet, and post to Facebook all at once. And it's created a bit of culture clash sometimes, and I'm sure some of you find that too. How many people here find that social media is a problem in their workplace? All right, nobody. All right, all right. I'm old-fashioned. But it's okay. Maybe you're not also paying attention to where your employees are really spending their time, but. It's created, I feel like it's created a bit of a culture clash, which is something I think we'll also talk about today in terms of what we want, what can be delivered, where the skill gaps are, what the potential solutions are, what you need as employers to help embrace this technology and make it work for you. So let me I'm very honored to introduce our first keynote speakers together, Commissioner Navracsics, and Alexander de Croo, please. So, Commissioner, you said earlier when we were talking in advance of this panel that your office is going to introduce a new Europe-wide skills agenda. And my experience with EU agendas is they kind of say a lot, but they don't necessarily do that much. So can you give me some concrete examples of what this new skills agenda can really deliver and when?
It's about, good evening, everybody. It's about Europe's future competitiveness, as usually education does or can do something meaningful, contribution to Europe's competitiveness. As you just mentioned, the digital era gains more and more spaces in our everyday life and in the economy as well. And we see that European economies are just losing their competitiveness relatively, but in absolute terms as well.
So what's this agenda? Can you give us some highlights of the agenda?
The agenda will be about skills, about the importance of the skills and about the direction of educating the skills we need. It's a coordination plan, of course, because we're just coordinating member states' activities. But it identifies directions, it identifies necessary skills, and it identifies some of the future prospects, which can be important from the point of view of education and employment policy.
Well, Alexander, what do you hope is in this new agenda? I mean, what does Belgium need?
Well, I would hope that on European level we shift to what I think is today really important. I think that the European policy is still very much focused on infrastructure, on investing in networks, investing in some big buildings, and some of them are useful and some are not. I think the new infrastructure today is skills. It's not the networks. And I think we as public sector, I don't think we should be involved at all in building networks. I mean, I'm also Minister of Development. I see that the whole of sub-Saharan Africa is being covered with mobile networks. And there's no public investment in that at all. This is all private investment. Now, you need to explain to me why it can happen in sub-Saharan Africa and why we would in Europe still invest with public money in networks. The private sector will do that if there is stability and if there is a certain prospect. That will actually happen. It will happen. You cannot expect the private sector to invest in skills and in education, but they could be a partner. And I think if we want to do it well, what we should try to push for is to help our technology firms and also do it with smaller firms in a consortium fashion to do a gigantic boost in training. And that training, I think, should be for a large part focused on the existing working population. If I just take the Belgian example, the expectation is that in 10 years, 90% of the jobs will require some digital skill. Today, if you take the Belgian workforce, approximately 60% of the population has that. Those 30%, that's going to be extremely hard, and we will need any means to basically get to that level. And so, if we talk about the FC funds and the Juncker funds and so on, the dimension that I miss is investing in skills. And today, too much money is going to bricks and stones, and I do not think that is the sensible investment today.
Tibor, what would you say to that?
Agree. Absolutely.
I just proposed you more funds, so you can really not be against
I'm
that.
commissioner responsible for education, so I absolutely agree. However, one of the priorities of the FC, the European Fund for Strategic Investment, is education. Probably there is a mismatch between the expectations of the public sector and the private sector, because private companies usually don't invest in public sector activities, and public sector, to be more precise, education, people, and education institutions probably are more reluctant to accept private investment. So we have to make it better, but one of the priorities is education in the FC, in the framework of FC.
Where has the European, what do you need more money? I mean, is this?
Yes, of course.
Well, okay. All right. Okay, that was a softball question. How much more money do you really need? I mean, for your budget, focused on skills. What is the budget right now, and what percentage increase do you feel you need, and what would you achieve with it?
We have simultaneous projects. We have the digital single market. We have the skills agenda. We have the Erasmus+. We have the Creative Europe. All those streams can help member states in making them more competitive. So if we had more money for applications, for calls, for new projects, member states can, and NGOs and education.
Can you put a figure on it? How much more? You always say you need more, but what do you need?
Well, we have the Erasmus+, for instance. And we can say that 500,000 euros per year can help exact number of students to go abroad and study there. Or we can have physical infrastructure investments from the money of FC, for instance. I can't tell you at the moment exact money because it depends on the development level of the physical infrastructure. It's different in Bulgaria, different in Belgium, it's different in Sweden and in Greece. But we have transparent projects, and everybody can follow the implementation of those projects. Those are concrete projects which can help building infrastructure, which can help investment in education, and students.
Let's try it. Can you point to an example, Alexander, where the EU funding has made a difference in the skills gap in Belgium?
Well, as you know, education here is a regional competence, and so it's hard as a federal level to intervene in that. But one point I wanted to make in addition to what the Commissioner said is, yes, it's money, obviously, but there's a lot of things we can do that is actually don't really need money to do it. And this is more to do with a certain message of, do you embrace technology or are you afraid of technology? If I look at the European discussion today, in some key topics, let's take big data. The discussion on big data is 90% about the threats. It's 90% about what could go wrong. Now, privacy is an important element, but we are not having the discussion on the benefits. And I think that's really a problem. Same discussion with the digital economy. When we talk about platforms, what do we talk about? We talk about regulating platforms. We talk about breaking up some of the international platforms. The real discussion we should have is, why don't we have big European platforms? Why don't we have it? Well, it's because it's all fragmented markets, and you need some scale. So what I would like to have, and I think it is as important as having budgets, is just a Europe that is forward-looking, a Europe that is not getting lost in fear of technology, but a Europe that says, let's use technology and let's talk about the upside. Too much our legislation is made around these and these things are allowed, and all the rest is forbidden. I think in the world of today, you need to say certain things are forbidden, and for the rest, let's go. Let's just go, and let's trust the fact that in general, when people do something, in general, they try to do good, even politicians.
Let me ask you both, actually. One of the things I do, I appreciate your wanting to talk about the positive side, but this is, since I have you here, Alexander, and it'll be a point on our panel next, is the issue that I hear this from businesses repeatedly, that students graduate without the right skills for the jobs that are available right now. They're leaving school without that. You're in Belgium, you mentioned that education is a regional issue. I appreciate that. But what would you say to people here in the audience who feel like they're getting a labor force that's not properly trained?
I think in the so rapid changing world of today, where we're going to is not only people with a specific competence level. What you're looking for is people with a certain level of aptitudes, of possibilities to learn new things. And a part of that is a basic technological knowledge. But let's be fair. I mean, if an IT graduates with a knowledge of some programming languages or some technologies, that's going to be obsolete in the next 5 years. Anyway. What you do need is to make sure that the education and the working world is more merged together. And actually, we see that in some domains, it's actually quite successful. If you look in the more more classic crafts, being a butcher or anything like that, that actually works very well. The dual education system that you talk a lot about in Germany and in Austria, actually it exists in Belgium too in that domain, and it works perfectly well. Now, why wouldn't we also do that more in the other types of things? We often say that you need to bring the students into the business world. I think that's great, but the first thing to do is to bring the teachers in the business world. I mean, it doesn't really make sense to bring the kids there if the teachers don't really know what's going on.
Do we have a program? No.
We don't have it yet, but it is something that I know the regions are working on. You know, the summer holiday in schools, where does it come from? It's not because people need 2 months of rest. The summer holidays, historically, it comes from the fact that a long time ago in the agricultural age, we just needed the kids to work on the fields. In July and August, they were needed for work. Now, that is not the case today anymore. Maybe we might actually use those 2 months for something useful. And a part of that is to bring the teachers in the companies, in the business world, and just give them more feel of what is going on today.
Can you imagine the labor unions in Belgium going for that?
Yeah, I can imagine them, and I just forgot that you were in a public room. Look, how bad would it be if we say we don't want to discuss this? Let's just close our eyes and forget what is going on in the rest of the world. I mean, I hope that's not the society we're in. I hope we're in a society where we can question things and when there can be a debate on certain things. So, yeah. Discussions with labor unions are interesting in Belgium. You might know that.
Yes, I do, indeed. Other questions? I really want this to be a conversation. Let me just ask you, put your hands up if you feel like the students graduating, just in Europe in general, do not have adequate skills for the jobs that you're hiring for. Hands up. Higher. Let them see them. Come on. There you go. All right.
Let me tell you 3 data.
Okay.
On the state of play in education in Europe. 2/3 of these schools are poorly equipped with digital tools.
2/3 Europe-wide?
Europe-wide, yeah. Okay. Only 20-25% of the pupils got competent education in digital skills in the European schools.
25%?
20-25.
So 1 in 4, 1 in 5.
And what is more astonishing, that 1 in 5 Europeans has serious problems with literacy, classical literacy, not digital literacy. It's classical literacy. So that's the state of play at the moment in Europe.
But aren't you talking about certain regions, perhaps rural regions, I'm guessing?
Of course, that's an average.
Right.
That means that there are countries, there are regions where the data are better.
I think the people hiring in this audience would be recruiting from the big schools in the city centers and the big capitals in general, which should have, they're saying, better competencies than they have right now.
Yes, hopefully. And the experience is that urban centers and better performing regions have usually better quality schools and better quality knowledge. But we have to pay attention to those rural and less fortunate regions where people also live, and they have probably less or worse chances for a good life.
Well, what would you say to Alexander's point earlier that the government should not be investing in infrastructure, right? They should be...
I fully agree. in case of Belgium, in case of France. But I can imagine in some rural areas where the logic of private investment, the return and the profit simply doesn't work. So in those areas, a public-private partnership or a public investment is needed.
Alexander, what would you say?
I mean, there are ways to deal with that. In your universal service provision, you can basically find a mechanism to make sure that there's a basic coverage. So there is a role to be played for governments. I definitely agree with that. It could be done with regulation and not with subsidies. I think there's different models for that. But investment in education, you cannot expect the private sector to do that. I mean, this is a completely different world. And though you see, if you take the Belgian example, I was actually surprised that programming skills or basic programming skills is not within something that an 18-year-old should know. It's not in there. Where I think that actually it would be much more useful than Latin. Today, Latin in Belgium is used as a way of educating kids in abstract thinking, but a programming language could do exactly the same thing. And I mean, what world are we living in? I see the value of learning Latin, but not. I mean, there's other more modern things that you can actually do to achieve that. What you see is that there's private initiatives all over. You might know things like Coder Dojo and the others, which are private initiatives that learn kids at a young age to program. I think that's great. But what you see is that the parents who bring their kids to these initiatives very often are parents that are actually quite interested in technology. And so you are missing out a big potential. And that is the reason why general education needs to embrace this more often, is because it touches on a much larger scale, and you make sure that you touch anyone. I think the key element in education that we will need to look at, I know that there is a discussion on will there be jobs in 2030. I'm convinced there will be jobs for humans, and I'm pretty sure you are convinced too of that. Now, the real question is, what will be the skills we need for those jobs? If I look at my kids, I have a 7-year-old and a 4-year-old. They go to the same school where I went, and that gives me a warm feeling sometimes. What does not give me a warm feeling is when I go into that school that is actually quite the same than 30 years ago when I went in there, and it's actually more or less the same methodology. That scares me a little bit. And if you think about what will humans always be better in, I think definitely in certain type of analytics will be better than machines and algorithms, but also in creativity and also in the emotional layer. And maybe there's some other things. But if you take those 3 dimensions, any kid has strengths in at least one of those 3. Any kid is or good on the emotional side, on the creative side, or on the analytical side. That is what needs to happen with the 4-year-olds of today. And I fear that that is not really happening. And that is the only fear that I have, is that you would move towards a society where only the analytical, high-skilled people would have a real job. And that we would tell to all the rest, we don't really count on you. And that would be the biggest mistake we could make. And doing today the good detection of other types of skills in which humans will always be better than machines and others, I do not see it happen today in kindergarten. And that actually worries me a little bit, that we might evolve towards a society where the idea of an inclusive labor market is actually an illusion. And I think that's a risk.
But you were in a position of power to influence the policies to change that school so that your children are not learning the same way you are. Can you give me some examples of conversations now in the Belgian government that will change this?
It is taking place. And I think that the key thing is that you give the schools more freedom in how to organize. In any schools, you will have young teachers who are completely...
Do you agree with that?
Well, yeah, basically, yes. There are some special circumstances where the income gap inside the country is so huge, then it can influence the performance of the schools as well. I mean, coming from a very poor region, can the people who are coming from a very poor region can have less life choices and chances than coming from the richer region. So in those countries, there are 2 or 3 in the EU where the income gap between the regions are really, really wide. In that case, some kind of central intervention can be needed. But otherwise, yes, I think as a fundamental principle, the freedom and autonomy of the schools are very important.
And just to give you one example, in the school of my kids, so some teacher convinced the school to buy a 3D printer. And that's how schools do it, right? They organize some waffle eating and beer drinking event. That's the Belgian way of doing it. And with that they finance a 3D printer. And the funny thing is, the 3D printer is in a classroom next to the playground. And kids can choose. When there is playground, they can play outside and play soccer, or they can go inside and play with the 3D printer. It's amazing. A lot of the kids do it. Until the moment that some inspection came to the school and said, oh, you're not allowed to do that. Kids need to play outside. I mean, that's what I mean. Give the schools more possibility in organizing their own things. Education will always be a human thing, but you can leverage it. And when we talked about the regions where it's more difficult, well, systems like Coursera and all the others are actually today at the university level, but this is trickling down to general education. We should leverage this much more. I mean, there will always be a human element, but using the vast amounts of data and of information is there, that is something that we need to get the teachers into. And that's going to be a long process.
What about suggestions from the audience? I mean, here are 2 powerful people who can get things done. What would you want them to do?
You don't know enough about Belgian politics.
Yeah, no more train strikes. That would be one. But seriously, are there suggestions, things that you would like to see changed in the system anywhere within social media? You can shout out anything from privacy to whatever, data security. Any suggestions? Please.
How do you incorporate all these online channels, the online learning tools that are there, inside schools, inside the university system, so that actually we use it right now? That's my first question. And the second thing is, I think you need to lead by example. So my question to you is, in your organization, in your own life, are you embracing these tools?
Mm-hmm. So maybe just on an example on how to incorporate. There is a project in Belgium which is called I Respect. And I Respect was created by the private sector. And it's just giving a few YouTube movies explaining kids 7 to 9 year old on how to use social media. Just the same way you learn a kid to cross the street and look to the left and look to the right. How do you use social media? What are the things that you should look out for? What are the risks? And what are the things that you shouldn't actually be afraid of? That was communicated to the schools. Actually, a lot of schools have the infrastructure to show that. And so there was a digital part to it, and then there was a physical side to it. These projects, it's great that the private sector pushed it, but it needs to come from inside too. And why don't teachers communicate through social media much more about the things they do well and the things they tried, the things that didn't work? You know, if the teachers don't communicate, the kids will, in any case. I think it is there. It is just that up to now, I think most of the teachers had the idea that it's their classroom, and they're used that everyone listens to them in their classroom, and they often are a bit hoarding the information that they have. And that, I think, in any industry today, it's actually quite the opposite. The more you share, the better you actually get.
Thank you.
And do I embrace social media? Yes.
Any other questions? In that case, please help me thanking our first